You cannot write a good piece of fiction without having a setting. In other words, when and where does your story take place? Give us that place. Setting means that a story takes place in a certain place at a certain time. And so the setting serves as a stage for the story. You might even start your fiction by showing us the stage briefly. For example, Grand Central Station during the morning rush hour on the first day of winter in 1988. You might give us the details of the train station, the flipping of destination letters on the blackboard, although these days that's all digital now, slushy water on the tiles, crackling loudspeakers with Long Island nasality, and the people, the jacketed commuter crowd, a gaunt police officer with a startled dog. What startled a dog? We are ready to visualize the action now that we have the stage and something to look at. Do you need real places for your fiction? The strongest novel I can think of, War and Peace, David Copperfield, and others, are set in real cities during real wars. Setting these days has fallen out of fashion at the expense of character and action. Perhaps this trend has to do with our not being a society of walkers. Big writers used to be big walkers. Almost every day, Honoré de Balzac spent hours strolling the streets of Paris. Charles Dickens, the streets of London. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the streets of St. Petersburg. Their cities speak out from them. And so these days, writers don't spend pages and pages just describing scenery anymore. Now it's all about character and action. There is a common argument against detailed descriptions of setting. They can be outright dull. In their eagerness for excitement, readers often skip the passages that deal with establishing the setting. I certainly do. It took me years to return to Thomas Hardy, The Return of the Native, because the first 10 pages are spent mostly in describing landscape, and no matter how fine the descriptions, I suspect that even the English readers of the leisure class skip those pages. These days, many writers avoid laying out the setting because they fear boring their readers, but the lack of a vivid setting may in turn cause boredom. Without a strong sense of place, it's hard to achieve suspense and excitement, which depend on the reader's sensation of being right there, where the action takes place. When descriptions of places drag, the problem usually lies not in the setting, but in presenting the setting too slowly. Make your descriptions dynamic and quick. Give bits of setting concurrently with characters and action. Take cues from drama. It could be a peculiar play in which all the props were displayed for half an hour before the actors walk on stage. Stage managers give you only the pieces necessary for a scene with actors already present. So as you write, you may have sketched out all the jails, creeks, and mules. Don't show them all first before the characters. And when you show the setting, be selective, giving only a few details that'll evoke a place. If the chosen details are vivid, the reader will piece together the whole picture from her imagination. Leave her that pleasure. I've mentioned vividness as a necessity for excitement. Fiction in many ways is similar to painting. Henry James certainly thought so. In The Art of Fiction, he wrote, "The analogy between the art of the painter and the art of the novelist is so far as I am able to see complete. Their inspiration is the same. Their process is the same. Their success is the same. They may learn from each other. They may explain and sustain each other." So that means that when we write a good piece of fiction, we paint a story. We paint a picture for the reader to experience. And then when we describe setting, we don't have to describe every little detail. We just use props, and then we let the reader imagine the rest, just like when you watch a play. Medieval paintings had no landscape for background, and the characters they portrayed expressed little emotion, no laughter. But by the end of the Middle Ages, exuberant life appeared in the foreground. Coincidence? I don't think so. Give your characters, children of your imagination, a lot of rich ground to move on to play out their drama. A child with a sand beach has a chance to be more active and creative. In other words, when you write a story, create a rich background. Create a rich background story and create a rich setting without going into a lot of description. These days, certainly not all, many writers withdraw their gazes from city, architecture, and country life, and as they do, their fictional worlds diminish. In other words, describing long pages of setting has gone out of fashion. And this author says, no, you should put back setting, but sparingly. A destitute vision of what's around us can't result in a wealth of inner substance. Writer that deals only with ego attains the humorless bleakness. In other words, if you don't have a rich setting in which the character plays out his story, then you make your story so narrow in scope. And so if you're going to write a good setting, you should answer the journalist's 6 questions of who, what, when, where, how, and why. A good piece of fiction strives to substantiate as much as a good piece of journalism does. Setting answers 2 of these journalism questions, where and when, and therefore setting is extremely important. Before beginning to write a piece of fiction, decide whether or not you want to use a real place or an imagined one. The advantage of anchoring your writing in a real place is that you will be rooted. You will draw new inspiration out of the houses and streets. Each town, street, or house has its own history. If you walk around the street, talk to its residents, read about it in old newspapers, you might unearth all kinds of interesting facts that compete to enter your fiction. In portraying a place accurately, don't fear a lawsuit, which would happen only if the locations give unmistakable leads to real people. So import your characters from other places and mask them so that not even their fathers would recognize them, or better yet, make them up. Notice how proud people are if their town has been used as a setting for a movie. The same is true of a successful book that uses an authentic setting. However, if you fear lawyers, you can always change the name and the looks of the town and its streets, and lie in a disclaimer that any resemblance to real places is purely accidental. For me, setting has been the primary source of fiction. So you need to have setting, character, and plot. So the three elements of a good fictional story is setting, character, and plot. Out of a place, a character is formed. Out of a character's motives, plot may follow. This may sound like a psychological theory that the milieu or the setting is everything and that a character is a product of her environment. On the other hand, in other words, your character is a product of her environment. Most Charles Dickens novels, you see the setting of London as dark, rainy, poor, gloomy, okay? And then that's a setting or the background that the stories are going to be dark, gloomy, and sad. And so the setting sets the mood or the ambiance for the story, which helps you understand the character, from where he comes from and his motives, and why, since he was raised in a poor neighborhood that's dark and dank, and why when he goes off to, say, a party in a rich neighborhood, he acts so awkward. He doesn't know the right way to, say, sit at a table and know all the different kinds of forks and knives that rich people know, for instance. So that from setting comes character motives, character behavior, and then from the character flaws, And however the character is going to evolve, that becomes your plot. Okay? So setting, character, plot. So that the character is a product of her environment. So a compromise giving weight to both nature and nurture works best. This approach could be setting, character, I think I just said that, plot. Out of a character's relationship with setting, or out of the character's conflict with the setting, you get the plot. In other words, as I just said, or the other way around, you have a rich, spoiled character who's never been to a poor neighborhood, and so she thinks that any second now a rabid dog is going to eat her alive, or she feels uncomfortable sitting among poor people or middle-class people that are not of the same status as her. So the character has some. So therefore, the setting or the setting where the character comes from, the setting, then indicates how the character will behave in the story. So in my story, so this character talks about his plot. Okay, and so here you have, the setting could be a time or a place. So you can have the setting as a war, like World War II or Pearl Harbor, and then you could set your love story and use the setting as the backdrop. So here he's talking about how he used war as the backdrop for his story in World War II and when Yugoslavia collapsed. Even if the setting and the character do not give you the plot, your story should appear as though the formula worked, so that the place, the people, and the action are integrated. If you import a plot from a newspaper and apply it to places and people you know, you must transform the places and the people so that the plot or what happens would be completely believable. Your characters should have sufficient motives to act the way they do, and these motives should be tied to the environment. So to give a simple example, don't organize a water polo game on a baseball field. Or if you insist, in other words, so a poor character would act awkward around rich people because she was raised in a poor neighborhood. I think in the movie The Help, and one of the characters was raised in a poor neighborhood, and another character came in, and she was the character's servant, and she was lying. She goes, "Oh, well, this bump on my head, I fell down." And the wife, she happened to marry somebody rich, and so the servant thought all these rich people are stupid, and therefore they wouldn't know. If I just give them a dumb excuse like I fell on my head, they won't know that it's child abuse, that I got beaten by my husband, because that would be so embarrassing. But the character who was raised, or she came from a poor neighborhood, she's like, "Are you kidding me?" She goes, "All my relatives use the same stupid excuse that they fell on their head. No, you got to leave that husband. He's abusing you." And then she gave a lot of examples, and you should have seen the servant open her mouth wide with surprise. How did the mistress know this? Isn't she supposed to be from rich society? How would she know about what it's like to be poor? And it's only later in the story that you realize, the husband married this girl, the poor woman, because all the rich girlfriends were snobby and treated him like dirt. So only this poor girl. Anyway, so it's very interesting. Okay, if you watch that. So here, in the setting with the character, because she was raised in a poor neighborhood, when the servant came up and tried to give that excuse, she could see right through it. And she said, "Oh," and then she knew exactly what you're supposed to do. You leave the husband. You got to have a safe harbor or safe place to go. And so, and she obviously had done this before for her relatives, as to arrange for her relatives to go someplace safe, away from the guy. So obviously she's done this a gazillion times. So she's telling the servant, "This is what I do with all my relatives. So you can come and live with my house for a while, get away from the guy." And the servant was like so amazed. That was so funny. So here you got the setting and how the character acts all together, and you bring the two together, and that's why when you write a story, You've got to give your story a sense of place.